My husband had an acute transmural myocardial infarction that caused his heart to rupture, and he was currently being desperately rescued in the operating room. But I wasn't in a hurry. I calmly took out a makeup mirror from my bag and continued drawing my eyebrows. With a loud bang, the operating room door swung open, and Marco, the lead surgeon, ran out, his forehead drenched in sweat. "Fiona, you're a national authority in cardiac surgery. I can't perform your husband's surgery." I kept my eyes on the half-finished eyebrow in the mirror, expressionless, and replied flatly, "I have severe depression, and I've been banned from performing surgery. There's nothing I can do." "But Samuel's heart has ruptured and is bleeding heavily. If we don't operate now, he'll die," Marco protested, panic creeping into his voice. I shot him a mocking glance and sneered, "Let him die. Then, why are you more anxious than I am?" Chapter 1. At that moment, my in-laws rushed toward me, their faces full of worry. They both fell to their knees in front of me. "Fiona, we're begging you. Please, you can't just watch Samuel die." I sighed and paused, putting down the eyebrow pencil. The director personally ordered me to stop performing surgeries and take time off for rest. I can't go against that. My mother-in-law glared at me, her body trembling with rage. "Fiona, I think you're just making excuses. What order is more important than Samuel's life?" My father-in-law, equally furious, stomped his feet and pointed at me, yelling, "If you don't save my son today, you're a murderer. The Sue family won't recognize you as our daughter-in-law anymore." I could understand their anger. After all, Samuel was the only heir of the Sue family. But in their eyes, depression wasn't something serious. To them, it was just overthinking, a condition caused by someone who had too much free time. They saw depression as nothing more than excessive complaining and dramatizing life and death issues. I couldn't be bothered to argue with such ignorant country folk. I simply stretched out my hand in front of them. When they saw my hands trembling violently, unable to stop, and my hollow, lifeless eyes, they were instantly terrified. My mother-in-law collapsed onto the floor, wailing and hitting her thighs. "My son, why are you so unlucky to have this disease? And why did you end up with such a wife? What am I supposed to do?" My father-in-law, frantic, squatted down and held his head, sobbing loudly. I took a deep breath and stared blankly at everything unfolding before me. I picked up the makeup mirror again and started drawing my other eyebrow. Today, Samuel's heart had ruptured unexpectedly, and I hadn't even had time to do my makeup before leaving the house. Now, I had to catch up. However, the tremors from my depression made it impossible to draw a decent shape for my eyebrows. I was so frustrated. Beside me, Marco, the lead surgeon, glared at me with disapproval, his eyes filled with anger. "Fiona, even if the director gave you an order, this is your husband. Can you really stand there and watch him die? I know you have depression, but can't you adjust your emotions and hold on for a moment?" He continued, pleading, "You know the only person who can save Samuel now is you. Isn't it too cold-hearted of you to act like this?" His words stirred up murmurs from the patients in the hallway, who began to criticize me. How can this woman be so heartless? If my husband needed me to save him, I'd defy even the emperor's order. Depression? What a load of nonsense. Just take some more pills, hold on for a while, and do the surgery already. Look at this woman's cold attitude. She probably doesn't even love her husband and is intentionally letting him die. Hearing all these accusations, I felt my emotions spiral out of control. I snapped the eyebrow pencil in my hand and, overwhelmed by my depression, shouted at everyone, "Do you all want to die or something?" Chapter 2. It's all your fault. You've made my eyebrows crooked. I'll kill all of you. I suddenly sprang to my feet, glaring with wild eyes, holding the broken eyebrow pencil in my hand, and charged towards the people who had been criticizing me like a madwoman. My in-laws and Marco were startled. They rushed over and grabbed me tightly, trying to hold me back. Marco shouted to the crowd, "Stop talking. She has severe depression. She's prone to violent outbursts and can attack people." The crowd, now terrified, fell silent. My in-laws patiently tried to calm me down and led me back to my seat, unable to hold back any longer. My mother-in-law spoke again, pleading with me, "Fiona, Now Samuel's life is in your hands. Please. I'm begging you. Can you control yourself and perform the surgery to save him? Anything you want. Just save Samuel. My husband and I will give you our lives if it helps. I stared blankly at the wall across from me, without any response. At that moment, the assistant from the operating room ran out urgently. Dr. Marco, you need to come back. The patient's heart has stopped beating. Marco grabbed my arm frantically. Fiona, are you really going to just watch your husband die? I continued to stare vacantly at the wall, showing no emotion. Marco shook my arm desperately. Fiona, wake up! Your husband is dying. I suddenly shuddered, turned my head, and looked at Marco, confused. What? I said your husband is dying. Only you can save him. I numbly stretched out my trembling hands. I can't save him. Seeing that I had made up my mind not to save Samuel, my mother-in-law let out a shrill scream and lunged toward me. Fiona, you heartless woman, even if your hands are shaking, you have to save Samuel. How could you do this to him? He loved you so much. He treated you like a princess. And you're doing this to him? For all these years, he's worked himself to the bone, sacrificing everything to give you the best life. He got heart disease because of it. And this is how you repay him? My mother-in-law was right. Samuel, although from a rural background, was exceptional and driven. We had been together since college, and now, 5 years into our marriage, he worked tirelessly to provide me with the best life. He worked long hours, sacrificing so much, and never let me work hard outside the home. In these 5 years, we went from having nothing to owning a villa and luxury cars, living a life of wealth, all thanks to his efforts. But they never knew what I had to endure behind all of Samuel's achievements. If our life had been so perfect, why would I have ended up with depression? But this was something I had no interest in explaining to my country-bred in-laws. They couldn't solve my problems. Seeing me unmoved, my father-in-law gritted his teeth and stepped forward. Fiona, just go save Samuel. We'll sign a waiver. No matter whether the surgery succeeds or fails, we won't blame you. And any consequences from violating the hospital's regulations, we'll take full responsibility for them. I froze for a moment. How will you compensate? Anything Samuel's earned, our villa, cars, and shares in the company, all of it will be transferred to your name. I was still hesitating when the assistant from the operating room ran out again, urgently addressing my in-laws. The patient is about to give up. He said he's sorry to Mrs. Fiona and that he'll treat her better in the next life. My in-laws screamed in despair, dropped me, and rushed into the operating room. Chapter 3. But soon, my in-laws rushed out again and knelt in front of me once more. Fiona, please, perform the surgery on Samuel now. Dr. Marco said there's still a chance to save him if we operate immediately. I'm begging you. Please. My mother-in-law bowed her head repeatedly in front of me, her forehead knocking the floor with each plea. My father-in-law immediately asked the nurse for paper and a pen, trembling as he wrote up a property transfer agreement. Both of them signed it, their hands shaking as they did. Seeing the two elderly people with tears streaming down their faces, looking at me with such hopeful eyes, I felt a twinge of emotion. Actually, my in-laws had always treated me well. The summer I first started dating Samuel, he brought me back to his rural hometown. They slaughtered their only egg-laying hen to make chicken soup for me, and kept me warm with their hospitality. They told me they'd never had the luck to have a daughter, so they treated me like their own. After we married, they didn't have much to offer, but they'd send me fresh, pesticide-free vegetables they grew themselves every month, traveling all the way to deliver them. Maybe because Samuel and I were both from rural backgrounds, we didn't have any generational gaps. I got along so well with my in-laws. Later, as Samuel and I settled into our prosperous life, I tried to convince them to move to our villa in the city, but they refused, afraid of disturbing us. Even though the whole family eagerly hoped for me to have a child, they didn't press me when I said I wanted to wait a few years. I always thought I was incredibly lucky to have found such a wonderful husband and family, until I discovered that Samuel wasn't as he seemed. Everything changed after that. The memories tightened my chest, and I felt my emotions boiling over again, on the verge of exploding. Marco, on the other hand, glared at me through clenched teeth, his voice low and furious. Fiona, you've gone too far. At a time of life and death, you're still thinking about the Sue family's fortune? Your husband is dying. And this is how you act. How heartless can you be? Seeing my expression, my in-laws immediately pulled Margot aside. Dr. Margot, don't provoke her. If she has an episode, Samuel will have no chance. Margot took a deep breath and regained his composure. Then, he turned to face me again. His jaw clenched as he spoke through gritted teeth. Fiona, if you won't help, then fine. It's just heart surgery. I'll do it. I don't believe anyone else can do it better than me. Margot's determination and defiance earned the admiration of everyone present. Well done. That's what a true angel of mercy looks like. Fiona is nothing but a disgrace to the medical profession. If that man survives, Margot definitely deserves a huge reward. He's earned it. Margot rushed into the operating room with great haste. I sat back down in the chair, staring blankly at the scene unfolding before me. I couldn't help but scoff to myself. This whole performance was so convincing, perhaps they should be awarded an Oscar. My in-laws exchanged a final, desperate glance with me, then sat down to anxiously await the results of the surgery. I was curious to see how they'd continue this act. Chapter 4. Perhaps I was too exhausted. I fell asleep in one of the chairs in the hallway. When I woke up, the hallway was much quieter, and there were fewer people around. I saw that the surgical assistant had changed out of their protective gear and was walking towards me. I quickly stood up and went to meet them. Has Samuel been saved? The assistant gave me a reassuring smile. Don't worry. He's been saved. My heart tightened at the news. Where is he? Which room? Room 307. I immediately stood up and made my way to the room. In the hospital room, Samuel lay pale against the bed, his parents carefully feeding him water. Margot was there too, asking Samuel about his post-surgery condition. Even the hospital director had come to check on him. I never would have imagined it. Our hospital has gained another expert in cardiothoracic surgery. Margot really is something, the director remarked. When Samuel saw me, his expression froze for a moment, but he still managed to lift the corner of his mouth. Fiona, you're here. The director turned his gaze to me, clearly displeased. He spoke coldly. Finally, you're here? Fiona, I really didn't expect you to be such a rigid and cold-blooded doctor. I understand you have depression and were on leave, but even in a case like this, an emergency, don't you think you should have made an exception? Why are you so afraid? Are you worried I'll punish you? Or is it the fear of being held responsible for a failed surgery because of your depression? These things are understandable. I'm not heartless, but for you to just stand by and let someone die, it's truly disappointing. At this point, I don't think you should even consider coming back to work anytime soon. You don't meet the ethical standards required of our doctors. You're no longer allowed to perform surgery. You're dismissed from the hospital. The director's words were sharp, as if he had already planned out how to deal with me. At that moment, several patients and their families passed by the room, throwing scornful glances at me. Ha! Isn't this the Jean doctor who refused to save a life? What a heartless monster. How dare she come here and face her husband? That's her! Her husband was dying, and she was still in the operating room, doing her makeup. She's an animal. Such a woman. If I were that man, I'd divorce her in a heartbeat, maybe even strangle her. I ignored the voices of the onlookers, my gaze fixed on Samuel. Samuel didn't blame me a single bit. Instead, he comforted me. Fiona, I know you have depression and couldn't perform the surgery. I don't blame you. Then, his tone shifted, filled with deep sorrow as he continued. But I heard that, when I was almost dying, you were thinking about taking my property from my parents? Do you really not care about my life at all? I'm your husband. Samuel's sudden turn, playing the perfect victim, and accusing me in such a righteous manner, was truly a performance. The crowd outside once again erupted in fury. What a heartless woman! She must have used up all her luck in previous lives to land such a good husband. Her husband is dying, and she's thinking about stealing his money? She's not even human. I glanced out at the crowd, then turned back to Samuel, my face calm as I smiled widely. My dear husband, your acting is really impressive. But now, Don't you think it's time for this little play to end? My words hit Samuel like a cold slap, and his expression froze. Chapter 5. Samuel stared at me for several seconds, his face tense, then suddenly broke into a warm smile. Darling, are you too tired today? What's with all this talk of acting? If you're exhausted, why don't you head home and get some rest? Turning back to Marco and the director, Samuel spoke sincerely. Dr. Marco, I truly appreciate you stepping in to save my life. Your medical skills are top-notch. As it turns out, Director, Dr. Marco risked her reputation and career to operate on me. And it was a success. That proves her courage and skill are on par with Fiona's. She really deserves to be rewarded. At Samuel's words, Marco's face filled with pride, and he deliberately shot me a provocative look. Samuel's parents immediately grasped Marco's hand, overwhelmed with gratitude. Dr. Marco, you're like the Bodhisattva Guanyin saving the suffering. Thank you for saving our son's life. The director smiled and patted Marco on the shoulder, his eyes full of admiration. Don't worry, Dr. Marco's excellent performance is clear to everyone. I'll make sure she gets the recognition she deserves. Watching all this unfold, I couldn't help but laugh with a hint of mockery. What a fantastic performance, I said, a sardonic smile on my lips. Samuel's face darkened, and he glared at me. Fiona, didn't I just tell you? If you're tired, go home and rest. Stop being so sarcastic here. Why can't you stand other people's successes? Marco saved me, and he deserves a reward. What's your problem with that? I looked at Samuel calmly, then let out a light laugh. I have no problem. I'm just curious. Though, was your heart rupture really as serious as you say? It seemed they had forgotten that I, too, was a seasoned doctor. I spent every day with my husband. Surely I could tell if he had a heart problem. Samuel worked hard every day and often had to attend social gatherings. 3 months prior, he had started preparing the ground for this story. He said he frequently felt tightness in his chest, palpitations, and dizziness, sometimes even experiencing chest pain, all classic symptoms of early-stage myocardial infarction. At first, I believed him and took him to the hospital for a full examination, but the results were alarming. His condition had already progressed to stage 4, with the risk of an acute episode at any time. As a doctor, I immediately felt that the results seemed unusual, so I insisted on a second examination. Yet the results were the same. It wasn't until I overheard Marco speaking to another doctor about Samuel's case that I began to doubt everything. As I was lost in those memories, Samuel cast a flicker of nervousness in my direction, then tried to act calm as he spoke. Fiona, you must be crazy. I almost died, and you're still here doubting my condition? I turned my gaze toward Marco, squinting as I smiled. Dr. Marco, you really believe Samuel's heart ruptured, and that he almost died, don't you? Marco, caught off guard by my question, looked flustered. His mouth opened, but no words came out. At that moment, the crowd gathered outside the door could no longer hold their tongues. They began to gossip and point at me. Isn't this Fiona a bit insane? Such a big hospital, with so many professional doctors, and she thinks they're lying? Yeah, what's she saying? Is she accusing her husband of faking his illness? Who's the crazy one here, her or her husband? I think Fiona's just looking for an excuse to avoid saving her husband, who pretends to be sick for no reason. I ignored the whispers and turned my cold gaze toward the director. Director, what do you think about all this? Chapter 6. The director glared at me, his expression stern and filled with seriousness. Fiona, what nonsense are you talking? How could something so significant be fake? Samuel is your husband. Why would he risk his life to play a joke on you? Samuel looked at me with eyes full of grievance. His eyes read, Darling, do you really not trust me? Or are you just saying this to avoid responsibility? I haven't even blamed you for not saving me during the surgery. How can you just make baseless accusations about me like this? Marco, standing beside Samuel, mustered up the courage to speak. Fiona, we're colleagues, and I'm a friend of Samuel's. Do you really think we would team up to deceive you? This is a life-threatening condition. You don't care about him. Fine. But what about your marriage? You don't even have enough trust to believe in him? Their words came together, each aiming to place all the blame on me. The crowd outside, fired up by their speeches, began to voice their anger. Fiona, you're nothing but a cold-blooded and vicious animal. Stop making excuses. You didn't save your husband. Fine. But Marco took the risk to save him. And here you are slandering him. What a disgrace. Just because you're depressed doesn't mean you can act like this. A woman so vicious, why don't you just go die? The director shot me a dark look. Fiona, you're a doctor at our hospital. Even if you have issues with your husband, even if you don't trust him, Marco is your colleague. Are you really going to doubt her? I've been following this case closely from the beginning. You're implying that I'm not trustworthy now. 2. Samuel's test was done right here at our hospital yesterday. And the records are still here. If you don't believe it, I'll have Marco pull the records for you. I smiled at the director. No need. It's our hospital. And even if you recheck, the results are still under your control, aren't they? What do you mean by that? Are you saying that the entire hospital is falsifying the records? Do you have any evidence to back up such accusations? The director was clearly getting angry. He clenched his fists and stepped toward me, as if about to strike. With the director backing him up, Marco grew bolder, looking at me with a sneer. Fiona, I thought you just had depression, but now I see you're mentally unstable. You really are a piece of work. Always making a scene. You're just trying to shut people up so no one will say you didn't save your husband. That's all this is, isn't it? A doctor like you, with great skills but no ethics? The director is absolutely right to fire you. Watching Fiona's mouth flapping and seeing the smug look on her face, I couldn't help but sneer inwardly. In this whole mess, I was the one who should not have been fired. The crowd outside continued to gather, unwilling to leave. The director sighed. Fine. Since Fiona insists we're all faking things, let's bring up the test records from that day. I let out a cold laugh. Sure, but I'm betting that when Fong from the IT department tries to pull the footage, he'll say that the system malfunctioned and the footage can't be retrieved. Then you'll have Marco and the hospital staff explain the situation, and the test results will magically appear, right? The moment I said this, the director's face turned black. What are you talking about? How do you know? Oh, really? Well then, go ahead and retrieve the records. Director, I'll be waiting. Chapter 7. As expected. Just a few minutes later, Fong ran in, hurriedly reporting to the director in front of everyone. Sorry, director. There was a malfunction with the monitors yesterday, so the footage wasn't recorded. I raised an eyebrow and looked at the director. See? I told you so. The director's face turned a deep purple, and in front of the crowd of onlookers, he wiped the sweat off his forehead. This is just an accident. Don't turn this into some kind of conspiracy theory. Now, let's have Dr. Marco, the attending physician, explain the situation. If necessary, we can bring in a few more doctors as witnesses. Marco puffed out his chest and stood up. I waved my hand and took out my phone. No need. I recorded the entire examination process on my phone. You don't need to say anything, just watch the video. My words instantly shocked Samuel, Marco, and the director, and they became visibly nervous. I took the data cable from my bag, connected my phone to the hospital room's TV, and pressed play. The first thing that appeared on screen were several examination reports showing Samuel's results, stage 4 myocardial infarction. Marco let out a relieved sigh and looked at me with mocking eyes. Well, I thought you had something special. But this is just the test result. I confirmed myself, stage 4 myocardial infarction. What's the problem? Samuel also relaxed, glaring at me in anger. Fiona, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to make a scene at the hospital? Is it not embarrassing enough for you? I raised an eyebrow. Unhurried. Don't rush. Keep watching. The next image that appeared was another test result with Samuel's name on it. But this time, the diagnosis was arrhythmia, with a recommendation for a pacemaker. Both reports were dated December 7th, the same time, yet the results were completely different. The crowd of onlookers began to murmur, confused. Marco cleared his throat, his face a little uncomfortable, and tried to cover up. So what? Who says a patient can only have one heart problem? It's reasonable for multiple issues to appear and require different treatment plans. Marco. It's one thing to fool the patients, but do you really think I, as a professional doctor, can't see through your tricks? Let's keep going. The next scene showed me pulling up Samuel's online medical records from the hospital's internal system. However, this screen only showed the arrhythmia diagnosis. There was no record of the myocardial infarction. I smiled at Marco. Marco. The hospital regulations state that all patient records must be entered into the system. So why is the myocardial infarction record missing? I must have forgotten to input it. I'll add it later. Marco stammered. The video continued, and the next scene showed a conversation between Marco and one of the interns. Alex. Marco. Do we need to enter this fake myocardial infarction record into the system? Are you stupid? Why would I enter a fake record into the system? Are you trying to get me into trouble when it's discovered later? Alex laughed and said to Marco, Hey, I'm just kidding. Why would I be dumb enough to enter it? But, Marco, are you sure there's nothing going on with that patient named Samuel? Why would you make a fake medical record for him? Alex, I warn you to mind your own business. Do you still want to be promoted? The video ended there, and it was a slap in the face for Marco. His face instantly turned as white as a sheet. Fiona, you're supposed to be on leave. How did you record this video? Why didn't I know you were at the scene at that time? Chapter 8. Indeed. Jean wasn't present. I used a backup phone and recorded everything in the corner, then sent it to her. Alex strode into the room, coldly staring at Marco. Marco was stunned. Good job, Alex. You're one of my interns. When did you start conspiring with Fiona behind my back? Marco. I'm not as vile as you and Samuel. I've never been involved with Jean. But I couldn't stand the fact that you were secretly having an affair with her husband. Marco's face drained of color, leaving him speechless. I looked at Samuel with a cold smile. My dear husband, don't you have anything to say? Samuel gritted his teeth and stubbornly argued. Just because of this one video, you're accusing me of having an affair with Marco? That's ridiculous. This only proves that Marco made a fake medical record, just a small mistake. Samuel, I really didn't expect you to still be lying at this point. Well, then I'll reveal the small mistake you and Marco made together. I suddenly dashed to Samuel's side, ripped open his hospital gown, and revealed his chest, where he had just undergone surgery. What I saw was a small, 3-centimeter incision. Beneath the skin, there was a visible oval-shaped protrusion, about the size of a watch dial. Amidst the gasps of everyone, I loudly declared, This is not a heart rupture incision. A heart rupture requires at least a 10-centimeter incision through the sternum. This surgery was a pacemaker implantation. It perfectly matches the arrhythmia result from your examination. So, the heart rupture diagnosis from the very beginning was fake. You deliberately used it to emotionally blackmail me into performing surgery on you. As long as I agreed, no matter the outcome, Marco would immediately announce my surgical failure, claiming that you died on the operating table, which would completely ruin my career. And you two had already prepared passports to flee abroad, planning to change identities and run away together. Having been exposed, Samuel immediately erupted in fury. This is all nonsense. Fiona, you've gone crazy. The story you've imagined is more dramatic than any novel. Couldn't it just be that Marco misdiagnosed my heart rupture? And in reality, I had arrhythmia. So they decided to implant a pacemaker instead? Wow. I didn't know that a simple medical mistake could turn into a grand conspiracy in your mind, where Marco and I were trying to frame you. You're just wasting time. Marco also looked at me with a panicked expression, nervously defending himself. Fiona, you've gone too far. When have I ever had an affair with your husband or tried to frame you? Are you going to take responsibility for these ridiculous accusations? Of course I will. Keep watching the video. It's not over yet. The screen flickered, and a video appeared showing Samuel and Marco in a car, flipping through the newly prepared passports. Well, the money wasn't wasted. We really got them. You'll be Jack, and I'll be Mary. Such cheesy names. Ha. That fool Fiona will never figure out that we're together. This time, we'll let her take the blame for the medical accident that killed me. She'll never work in this field again. She'll never guess that we'll change our names and move to St. Kitts and Nevis. The two exchanged a smug smile, embraced each other, and began removing their clothes. I quickly fast-forwarded through the following uncomfortable footage. Samuel's face turned pale as a ghost. His eyes were filled with fear as he stared at me. Fiona! I deleted the dashcam footage. How did you still manage to back it up? Chapter 9. You might have forgotten. But not long ago, you complained that the dashcam had limited storage. I bought a cloud storage service with a backup feature, and I even gave you the link. It looks like you forgot to delete the backup. There are still several videos of your disgusting actions, but I won't play them all for you. Now that the facts are clear, do either of you have anything else to say? Samuel gritted his teeth and coldly said, Fine. Since you know everything, I won't hide it anymore. I haven't loved you for a long time. I've fallen for Marco. She's wild and seductive, and she knows how to please me. I'm leaving you. We're already planning to move abroad. Marco sneered as he looked at me. I never expected this from you. Fiona, you actually outsmarted us. But so what? Can it change the fact that Samuel no longer loves you? What's the point? Of course it matters. At least I've exposed the fact that you two tried to frame me for cheating while also ruining my career. And you think this is all I know about your filthy secrets? Let me remind you, leaving the country is no longer an option. What awaits you now is a one-way ticket to prison. Suddenly, the sound of police sirens filled the air, and a large group of officers stormed in. Samuel, Marco, Oliver. We've received reports that you three are involved in bribing patients and faking medical procedures to embezzle hospital funds. Come with us. I didn't do anything. This is nonsense. Who reported this? Where's the evidence? Marco struggled to escape, but the police quickly restrained him. It was Dr. Fiona, your colleague here at the hospital. Who reported you? Of course we have the evidence, and we'll show it to you at the station. Also, the bribes Marco and Samuel took from patients, as well as the hospital funds they embezzled. Lou, the director, is also involved. Director Lou, stop standing there. You're coming with us too. The scene outside the door was chaotic. The onlookers were stunned. No way. The situation is this complicated? We actually wronged Dr. Jean. I can't believe it. Marco was so convincing. But it turns out he was the one having an affair with Dr. Jin's husband and framing her. What a twist! We've all been blaming Dr. Jean, and it turns out she's the real victim. The reversal left my in-laws, two simple rural folks, utterly speechless. The elderly couple rushed to Samuel, who was now handcuffed, and slapped him across the face twice. His mother cried uncontrollably. We raised you with so much effort, sent you to college, and this is how you repay us. His father stomped his feet in anger. You fool! Fiona is such a good woman. And you weren't satisfied with her. You went behind her back and slept with her colleague? No wonder she got depression. It's all because of you. The story reached its dramatic conclusion, and all involved parties were taken to the police station for questioning. The investigation revealed the truth. Samuel had met Marco a year ago when he was picking me up from work. The two immediately hit it off. And while I wasn't looking, they secretly added each other on WeChat. From that moment on, their affair spiraled out of control. At the cardiothoracic department, Marco had always been resentful of me for overshadowing him. He intentionally seduced Samuel and conspired with him to ruin my career and escape abroad. In order to fund their escape plan, Marco had been illegally collecting bribes from patients, totaling over $1 million yuan. He had also been stealing medical supplies and high-priced medicines from the hospital and selling them through Samuel's company. They even involved the hospital director, Lou, in their scheme, fabricating medical assistance programs to embezzle hospital funds. Together, the three had illegally obtained over 30 million yuan from the hospital in a year. This was the true reason why Director Lou had been protecting Marco and Samuel, wanting to get rid of me. Soon, Samuel, Marco, and Director Lou were all sentenced and received the punishment they deserved. The hospital appointed a new director, and I was promoted to head of the cardiothoracic department. With Marco and Samuel gone from my life, my depression quickly improved. What awaited me next was a brand new life that was truly mine.